The concept of caching can be used in a lot of areas to increase application performance and network performance. Using the BitScoop API Toolbox, you can actually take advantage of caching built into the system to reduce the latency of your outbound HTTP calls to various data providers. So what we're going to cover in this video is how to set up very basic HTTP caching on a particular endpoint for a provider map, show you a few examples, and get you up to speed on that front. Before we go any further though, let's touch on some of the motivations of why we would use caching, past what we've already introduced. So the main point is that you can reduce latency on the network by leveraging our internal network at BitScoop to reuse responses that you've already received from a data provider. Basically, whenever you have a network step, it's going to add time. And so if you can reduce the number of steps you take, you reduce the latency overall. You can also reduce the number of uses that a particular API key for a particular data provider incurs. So if you save the response on the BitScoop cache, you might not necessarily need to make as many calls to a remote data provider. Please keep in mind, however, that various data providers may put restrictions on caching in their end user license agreements. So we ask that any data provider that you might be using, you just research those and just be aware and don't use our system to circumvent those restrictions. So let's take a look at how we would set up caching on a particular endpoint for a sample provider map. We've already gone in here and created the provider map, so we already have it. So we're going to hop right into the source code and see what this looks like. Notice there is no cache configuration on this endpoint at all. So if we were to go over to our other screen and start making requests, so I'll open up our collection over here and request a single post instance with an ID of 1. We're going to send this, and we're going to see a single request over on our data provider on the right-hand side of the screen. And you can see the data that's sent back right here. If we send another request to the same URL, we're going to get another request to our data provider. So this is what you would expect when there is no caching configured, right? The request comes to the BitScoop API Toolbox, it's then forwarded to the data provider, and then sent back to you as the end user. So what we're going to do is go ahead and add caching to this endpoint post. And all we need to do is go in here. And for simple cache configuration, we're just going to set an expires time. And the unit is in seconds, and it's just a regular number. So this is basically saying in 15 seconds, the request is no longer valid in the cache and it should be deleted. So any request after that point will hit the data provider again. So let's go ahead and save this. And we're going to go over to the other screen, and we're going to make the same request again. And you can see that it did hit the data provider, as we would expect, because it's not in the cache yet. But if we send it one more time, you can see we'll keep sending it and keep sending it. It's in the cache, so it's not going to hit the data provider. So now that we've gone over how you actually store returned HTTP data into the BitScoop API Toolbox cache, we wanted to very briefly cover how you would get rid of that information if you no longer wanted it, or if you only wanted it for a certain amount of time, and that time was less than what you had configured it for. So it's very easy to clear the cache. All you need to do is send a purge HTTP request to the URL that's listed here, and remember that map ID is the ID of your particular provider map. Your other option is to update the provider map, although generally this is not something you would just do to clear the cache, but it's something that it happens as a result of any update to a provider map. And then finally, you can just let the cache expire normally, as you would expect based on typical caching behavior. So let's quickly take a look at an example of clearing the cache just to show how everything works. So we're going to open this up and we're going to send a request to our same endpoint post. We're going to request a post with an ID of 1. We're going to send this, and you can see that it returns the data. We're going to send it one more time. You can see that it's cached, as we saw before. And if we instead send a purge request to the cache for this particular provider map, and then we go ahead and send the request again for a single post, you can see that it requests the post from the data provider. So this covers the very basics of how to get set up with caching on the BitScoop API Toolbox. There are a few extra features that we'll be covering in later video series. As always, we'd encourage you to check our GitHub repository filled with a bunch of provider maps that you can use as a basis, for example, as you write your own. We'll also be here and available to answer any questions that you might have. Just feel free to send us an email or anything. Aside from that, thanks so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon in some future videos.